Hi all, Fox here. So, if you've been following my blog for very long or know me personally, you might be aware that I have a chronic pain condition called endometriosis. Um, Not usually a big deal in terms of my work and writing and things like that, but with a project like Vlogmas, aka Creepy Christmas, where you're kinda stuck with me on a day to day basis. Um, Unfortunately, you're going to see a little bit more of that. Today is one of those really bad pain days, so I can't get out of bed to set up my gear for all of my recording stuff. So today's production value is going to be a bit lower than I would like. Really sorry about that, but I hope you can bear with me. The story that I'm going to be sharing with you today is really awesome. It's also one of the longer ones. So, we are going to have ourselves a little adventure. This piece is The 12 Days of Christmas by Alice J. Black. Torrents of rainwater bucketed from the sky as Clive stepped out into the day. He grumbled as he stared at the sky. This time of year should be cold, yes, but not pissing cats and dogs. He wanted snow. It had been a long time since they'd had a good snowfall. Pulling his coat tighter and turning the collar up around his neck, he ducked his head, ready to leave the safety of the porch when he stopped dead in his tracks. On the step in front of him, tucked just safely out of the way of the rain, was a small parcel. It was wrapped in red and white striped paper, immediately conjuring the image of a candy cane. A huge red ribbon tied it up neatly, a bow cresting the top and wafting in the breeze. His eyes went to the pathway beyond the long drive of his house, looking for the person who had delivered the box. He saw no one. He considered the gift. Maybe it was something from Marie. She had been a bitch lately, and she did like to make flashy shows of apologies. He bent low to pick it up, and as he scooped it into his meaty hands, he found that it was so light he actually considered that it was empty. An empty box. Now that would be something. Still, he stepped back inside the house and closed the door, glad for the brief reprieve of the rain. He set the box on the small hallway table and flicked on the light to ward off the dim morning as he inspected the gift. The paper was shiny and felt slick beneath his fingers, and just beneath the bow, a little card had been tucked neatly. He plucked it out and brought it to his face, staring down at the neat script. On the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. A familiar tune sprung to mind, and he recalled the Christmas song. This was definitely something that Marie would do. She loved traditions and all things Christmas. Maybe she was just getting into the spirit of the season. Dropping the card on the table, he pulled at the bow, releasing the streams of ribbon. They cascaded to the floor as he continued unwrapping, peeling the festive wrapping back. The edges were immaculate, and the tape placed so that it came apart at the slightest beckoning. There was a small box inside, small enough to be a ring. Frowning, the furrows finding their home on his brow as he had begun to realize every morning when he stared at his reflection in the mirror, he opened the box. Another card lay inside. He picked it up and read the script. 1 fingernail. Grimacing, he lowered the card to look inside the box. 1 complete and unmarked fingernail. He saw the bed of the nail, complete to the very perfectly manicured tip. It was almost as if it had been ripped from a hand, very expertly if he said so himself. Or it was a plastic one. Gingerly he reached down, his fingers trembling as he picked it up. It gave slightly, bending under the pressure of his finger, and he knew instantly it wasn't a fake. What the fuck? He muttered under his breath, to nobody in particular. Who would go to the trouble to do this? A sick joke, that's all it was. He dropped the nail back into the box, along with the card, and set it down on the table. A joke. but there was something unsettling that left a sour taste in his mouth. Clive glanced at his phone. Still no text back from Marie. Usually his girlfriend was good at replying. After all, she normally had the phone glued to her hand, but it seemed that she'd managed to pry it from her fingers for a whole day. Either that or she was pissed at him. He dropped his phone back into his pocket with a sigh. It was always the case with women. No matter what he did, he could never please them. They just wanted to be thankful that he wasn't the man he used to be. Then they'd have something to complain about. He glanced out of the living room window to see the sky was still dark gray and threatening rain. He glanced at the umbrella in the stand, but decided to forego it, in the hope that if he ignored it, the day might get that little bit colder and shower him with snow instead. Jamming his wallet into his pocket alongside his phone, he stopped at the doorway where the box still lay on the table from yesterday. After a hectic day at work, Clive hadn't wanted to think about anything when he returned from work. Instead, he made straight for the kitchen where he poured himself a healthy measure of whiskey to chase the sour taste from his mouth, and that was to top up from the shots he'd had through the day to keep him steady. It had remained there since that morning, and nothing had gotten better. The gift, if that's what it could be called, would remain on the table until later. He didn't have the strength or the willpower to deal with it that morning. Opening the front door, he was just about to step over the threshold when he saw it. Another parcel. It was the same size as the previous one, and this one glistened with silver wrapping adorned in snowflakes. He stared dumbfounded for a moment. Another day, another gift. A shred of discomfort lingered in his stomach, and only intensified as he bent over to pick it up. He set it on the table next to the first. This was getting uncanny. One present, if that's what he could even call it, could be forgiven as a practical joke, despite the fact that he still couldn't think about who would send such a thing. He'd spent most of the day trying to figure it out. But two? It wasn't a joke anymore. And after the present he'd found in his first gift box, he wasn't sure he wanted to open this one. He stared at it for a few seconds, debating whether to just forget about it and head out to work. There was plenty to do today, and he needed to get started. But he knew he couldn't. It would prey on his mind the way a mishandled business transaction could. He'd have to open it. As he reached forward, he saw the card tucked just beneath the box and picked it up, reading the words, even though he already knew what it said. On the second day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. He swallowed hard and pulled the ribbons apart, feeling one of them snap beneath his fingers. Sometimes he didn't know his own strength. That was why he was who he was now, the man at the top. Peeling back the paper, he found another box, and as he opened that, another card. 2 clots of blood. His stomach lurched, and he lifted the card, careful not to touch whatever lay inside. Then he saw it. 2 red clots of blood, thick and viscous, sitting on a bed of fluffy cotton wool that had been stained red in a macabre scene akin to a Halloween film. He dropped the card and it fluttered to the floor. Blood. He wasn't scared of the stuff. Hell, in his profession, he figured he'd seen more of the life fluid than most doctors, but this was different. This was grim. He stared at the blood until it was ingrained in his mind, red spots dancing before his eyes. There were just so many questions and no way to figure it out. Setting the box down, Clive left the house. Later, he decided he would dispose of both presents and set about finding out who was leaving him those macabre presents. Clive Reading was not a man to be trifled with. As the third day approached, Clive felt apprehension welling deep in his stomach. Marie still hadn't replied to him despite his numerous attempts of temptation. She was radio silent, as was his friend Roberto, who he'd rang the night before in an attempt to get some clarity on a situation that was gaining too much momentum for his liking. Rob hadn't answered, which wasn't unusual, and he had just hoped that his friend would call back during the day. As Clive came down the stairs, he glanced at the door. The table was void of items, the previous gifts having been dumped in the bin the night before, following several shots of whiskey. Whoever was doing this knew just what effect it would have on him. Clive was known as the Butcher. Blood was part of his daily job, and he loved, no reveled in it. But having his privacy invaded was something different altogether. Usually the first thing he did on a morning was head straight into the kitchen and make himself an espresso from the machine Marie had gotten him for his birthday. He considered himself a man of refined tastes in many aspects of his life. Now, as he stared at the front door, he knew his routine was about to change. Striding forward, he grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, eyes immediately sinking to the floor to find that there was another parcel. It was wrapped the same way, with ribbon sprouting and a magnificent bow on the top of the black, shiny paper. Clive reached down and yanked it up, slamming the door shut. This time he wasted no preamble on the card sitting by the bow. He knew just what it said, and instead ripped open the packaging. The paper gave under his fingers, tearing and drifting to the floor, but his eyes were on the card inside the box. 3 fingertips. He swallowed to remove the lump in his throat. When he lowered the card, he saw 3 fingers, cut at the top joint, resting neatly inside the elongated box. The fingernails were manicured, much like the fingernail on his first gift had been, and the skin soft up until the spot it ended, where the finger had been severed from its owner. He grimaced as he stared at the digits. He had taken plenty in his time from thieves, from men who deserved nothing less, but he couldn't figure out why someone would send them to him and who they had belonged to. Shit was getting serious, and it was time to call in help. Day 4 came, and without so much as a response from anyone. Marie was giving him the silent treatment for something which he'd apologize for after all this was over. Rob still hadn't called back, and neither had Jim. He woke early as wind rattled the trees, the branches of the bare limbs scratching against the pane of the window. Glancing at the clock, he saw it was 5 a.m, and he knew he wouldn't get back to sleep. Not now. Instead, he wrapped his dressing gown around his body, pulling it tight, and headed downstairs, making for the front door. Just as he suspected, there was a small parcel waiting for him. With a sigh that he felt shake his entire body, he reached down and picked it up with as little contact as possible and set it on the table next to the box with the fingertips. This one was longer again, about the length of a pencil. He stared at it for a minute without moving. Every sense that he had told him to just get rid of it. Whatever was in that box wouldn't have a happy ending. But there was a morbid curiosity that came with the parcels. He wanted to know what was inside of it. Wanted to know what some sick fuck had come up with to torture him with. And where the body parts were coming from. There was no way he could go to the police. He wouldn't be laughed out of the station. He would be hauled in on some imaginary charge they concocted. Clive had a bad reputation, and he'd been on the radar of the cops for a long time. So far, they hadn't been able to connect him with anything. He was good at what he did and intended to keep it that way. No, the police were out of the question. He would handle this himself. He ripped the wrapping off the package and opened the box. The card was sitting neatly, hiding the contents beneath. His eyes scanned the writing. 4 strips of skin. He reached down, hooking the card beneath his finger and lifting it carefully. There, laid out across a sheet of cotton wool, the edges stained pink, were 4 strips of skin. They were long and thin and cut expertly, the edges almost smooth, almost as if someone had been flayed. He hadn't come across anyone who was so proficient at the task, and it left him stumped. He forced himself to take a closer look. The skin was just that, skin. Pale where the blood had left the capillaries. There were no identifying marks or features. Whoever was sending these gifts had thought this through. Day 5 came, and Clive wondered what would be coming for him. He'd been awake most of the night, sleeping in fits and starts, and as the gray dawn rose late over the world, he went straight down the stairs to the door. A parcel lay on his porch, and he picked it up, bringing it inside and setting it amongst the others. Yesterday, he'd trawled back and forth through the rubbish in his bin and retrieved the first 2 packages, and now they all sat in order on the table, with the 5th one nestled beside. On the 5th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. Tearing the paper, he pulled it aside and opened the box. 5 little bones. When he lifted the card, he caught sight of 5 white objects nestled in the box. They could have been from anything, but he knew they were human. Strips of flesh hung on several of the bones, and the blood that congealed on the dead skin told him that whoever they belonged to had lost them quite recently. Today was the 5th day, and so far he had 1 fingernail, 2 clots of blood, 3 fingertips, 4 strips of skin, and 5 little bones. By his reckoning, there were still 7 days to go. He must have made 20 calls the day before, if not more. The people he did speak to had no answers to his veiled questions, and plenty of others didn't pick up. Clive had only a few close people he considered friends. Rob, Jim, Trey, and of course Marie, and none of them were speaking to him. The parcel waited outside for him as usual. He was still in his night clothes, and had long ago decided that work could wait. He had to see this through. The box was heavier as he lifted it, and he grimaced at the thought that he would find another grim offering inside. Ripping off the paper, he opened the box and found the card sitting on top of something. This box was deeper, and he didn't want to lift the card at all, but he did anyway, bringing it to his face to read the words, careful he didn't look past. 6 whole eyeballs. He swallowed and looked down. The round white orbs were sitting neatly on cotton, all of them staring up at him. He saw blue irises and darker ones. Capillaries ran through each of them, and they glistened with fluid that came from eyes. They had been taken recently. He felt the gorge rise in his throat and managed to turn his head just in time to avoid hitting the box in front of him. Something about a lack of respect held deep in his bones. He wasn't about to lose his stomach over somebody's eyes. Literally. Day 7 brought continued radio silence and a larger box. The chill of the winter didn't even register as he opened the door to collect his gift. He was so weary now that every part of him was cold, almost like his soul had died and still rested in the shell of his body. Clive opened the box, ignoring the tag that fell to the table. 7 severed ears. They sat in a row, all of them cut off where they met the head. Clive saw white cartilage poking out from beneath the torn skin. Spots of blood covered the appendages here and there, but mostly they were clean. Setting the box down, Clive did the maths in his head. 7 ears meant at least 4 people, but who? When the gray morning finally woke on the 8th day, Clive roused himself. He'd been up most of the night in the chair in the living room, the blinds partially open, and a gun in his lap. The weight of it was heavy and comforting, and as he'd taken it from beneath his bed, he felt better. That feeling of power, of control, returned. He was a man again, and he would solve this problem any way he had to. His one rule had always been no killing in his own home. It was too easy to trace and was a surefire way to get him locked up. But right now he was willing to forgo any rules to see this fucker downed. He had seen no movement all night. The security lights outside his home had remained dark, and yet as he finally stood from his position on the chair that morning and went to the front door, he found a parcel there. Confusion fogged his brain as he tried to figure out a logical explanation for it arriving, but after a few minutes he gave up and brought it inside. He unwrapped it without preamble and stared down at the card. 8 lopped-off nipples. They rested in a shallow grave, Pinks and browns, small and large, 8 nipples. He sat the box down. 4 days to go. He stayed up again, hoping to catch the dark spirit of Christmas, but he remained unseen, and yet the parcel arrived on day 9 with a flurry of snow. Clive hurried to bring it inside, shielding it from the elements. The box was long, and weighed more in his arms. He ripped off the paper. 9 wagging tongues. And there they were, stretched out in front of him. One of them had a piercing, the ball sticking up from the dead flesh. 9. That meant 9 people were dead. Day 10 came with an even heavier bout of snow. It whipped in the air and carried into his home as he opened the door. He lingered a little longer, searching for footprints in the white powder. There were none. Another larger box. The gifts he was being sent were more elaborate, more gruesome. He tore the paper and let it fall to the floor beside the rest of untouched wrapping. 10 worms of gut. Inside, 10 thick slices of intestine were nestled amongst the cotton. They looked like fat, undercooked sausages and rolled every time the box moved. Clive swallowed back the bile that rose in his throat and set the box down. 2 more days to go. The snow was deeper now, halfway up his shins. Still no footprints, and yet there was a parcel on the morning of the 11th day. The same routine, the same grisly outcome. The wrapping came off, the bow falling to the floor as he opened the box. 11 muscles stretching. The muscles had been cut from flesh, stripped of skin, and stretched out like a slab of beef on a chopping block. There was no way to tell what part of the body they came from, or who they belonged to. Clive longed for this to be over. The person leaving the gifts on his doorstep had to slip up. Only 1 more day to go, and he would find the fucker who had carved up all those people. Day 12, the last day of Christmas. He hoped this would be the last gift. Still no contact from the outside world, no answers, no suspects. He was a man in need of revenge and no way to seek it. At least, not until the last day was over. Downstairs, he crept through the silent house, a man on high alert. He was a shadow of his former self. The weight of the gun still pressed against his lower back, but now he doubted it would be enough. Whoever was leaving him the packages every morning was not human. He couldn't be, to have mastered such trickery and deception, and to have taken so much life was unheard of. Only the butcher could have wreaked that much havoc. The parcel at his door was large, like a donut tray. He doubted it contained anything like the sweet treats he adored. Picking it up, he cleared a space on the table and set it down. On the 12th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me. He swallowed. This was it. The last grisly gift and a Christmas to remember. 12 deadened hearts. Inside the organs lay still, shriveled as the blood that once flowed through it had been drained. 12 hearts, 12 people. There was another note inside. He picked it up and read it, his lips moving. On the 12th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me 12 deadened hearts, 11 muscles stretching, 10 worms of gut, 9 wagging tongues, 8 lopped off nipples, 7 severed ears, 6 whole eyeballs, 5 little bones, 4 strips of skin, 3 fingertips, 2 clots of blood, and 1 little fingernail. Butcher, I have always admired your work. The death count in the city can mostly be attributed to your timeless effort and honed skills, and I'm sure that you have rid the streets of some horrendous people. You have also taken innocent lives, the lives of people that I loved. I hope you've enjoyed your festive treat. I knew that you would appreciate all the hard work it took to achieve such a huge quantity of body parts. Tell me, how is Marie?" Realization dawned as he stared down at the dead hearts in front of him. 12 dead hearts, 12 dead people. They were all dead. All of them. Marie, Rob, Jim, Trey, everyone he ever knew or cared about were lying in pieces on his table, an assortment of limbs and pieces. Vengeance had been served. Again, if you've enjoyed this story, it was 12 Days of Christmas by Alice J. Black. You'll be able to find more links to where you can find Alice's work in the description. She will have this particular piece posted